Damien Hawthorne was not just a man, he was an institution, a walking enigma carved into the cold heart of Manhattan's skyline. His very name murmured in reverence and fear through the steel corridors of power where billion-dollar deals were sealed and reputations were crushed before breakfast. His presence so commanding that even the most ruthless investors lowered their gaze in board meetings when those piercing blue eyes, sharper than shattered glass, swept across the room. At 36, Damien was the epitome of control, the kind of man who built his empire brick by brick from sheer willpower and sleepless nights, rising from betrayal and ruin to dominate industries others only dreamed of touching. Yet for all his wealth and brilliance, for all the whispered legends about the deals he'd brokered and the fortunes he'd made, Damien remained a man untouched. Not only untouched by scandal, but untouched by love, untouched by tenderness, untouched by the very human warmth that most took for granted. 2 decades earlier, before the suits and skyscrapers and relentless headlines, Damien had known love, the kind that made a man believe he could conquer the world with nothing but a smile and a heartbeat. But that illusion was shattered when the woman he trusted most stole everything. His heart, his trust, his innocence. Vanishing into the night with his best friend and leaving behind a hollow shell of the man he once was, a wound so deep it calcified into ice, making him vow never to feel again, never to trust again, never to let anyone close enough to destroy him a second time. Since that night, Damien lived inside walls no one could breach, walls of glass and steel that mirrored the city below, his penthouse perched above Manhattan like a frozen throne from which he ruled without mercy, where silence reigned louder than any laughter, where every surface gleamed, but no, in a single photo adorned the walls, where the man inside had become a ghost, haunting his own life. Colleagues whispered about him in hushed tones. The untouchable CEO, they called him, and Damien embraced the title, wearing it like armor, perfecting the art of being untouchable until the very idea of touch, of love, of vulnerability felt foreign, almost laughable. And yet fate has a way of striking when least expected, a way of dismantling carefully built fortresses with a single, unassuming moment. And Damien's moment arrived on a cool autumn morning, golden leaves scattering across Fifth Avenue, the air crisp with change, when a young woman named Isla Monroe walked nervously through the revolving glass doors of Hawthorne Tower and into his life. Isla was 24, a quiet beauty with sun-kissed blonde hair that caught the morning light like threads of gold, emerald eyes that held both storms and secrets, and a grace that wasn't loud or ostentatious but disarmingly gentle, the kind of beauty you noticed not because it demanded attention, but because it soothed something restless inside you. She carried herself with a mixture of poise and vulnerability, clutching her resume with hands that trembled ever so slightly, a silent testament to battles fought and heartbreak endured. For Isla, too, bore scars. Scars no one could see. Scars that taught her resilience in a world that had been anything but kind. She had come to Hawthorne Industries not for dreams of wealth or glamour, but for survival, desperate to rebuild her life after the fiancé she once trusted left her standing alone at the altar, humiliated and broken, forcing her to abandon everything familiar and start over in a city that devoured the weak. Yet there she was, standing in the reception of Manhattan's most feared CEO, heart pounding as the elevator carried her toward the 38th floor, toward the man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before a storm. When the doors opened, the first thing she felt wasn't the chill of the air-conditioned hallway, but the weight of his presence. Damien Hawthorne, standing behind his desk of black marble, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the city sprawling beneath him like a conquered kingdom, his tailored suit impeccable, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, his expression unreadable yet devastating in its intensity. Their eyes met for the first time, and the world seemed to still, not in some cliched romantic way, but in the raw, unnerving quiet of recognition, as though two souls scarred in different ways had silently acknowledged each other's pain. Damien barely looked at her, forcing himself to maintain the cold detachment he'd perfected over 20 years. Yet something inside him shifted violently. An unwelcome flicker of warmth sparking in the darkness he'd lived in for so long, a whisper he didn't want to hear, a question he wasn't ready to ask. What if she's different? Isla, equally shaken, felt her carefully constructed resolve tremble under the weight of his gaze, that infamous gaze she'd heard whispered about in coffee shops and news articles. A gaze that could terrify seasoned executives, yet, inexplicably, made her feel seen, truly seen, in a way she hadn't felt in years. She lowered her eyes quickly, afraid he might read the truth written in them. The loneliness, the quiet longing, the unspoken promise to never be heard again. And in that silent exchange, something unspoken passed between them, something neither understood but both felt. The beginning of everything they had sworn they'd never want. Isla Monroe had only been Damien Hawthorne's assistant for a matter of weeks, but already she understood why the man was both feared and revered. A paradox wrapped in Armani suits and silence, whose icy reputation preceded him into every room he entered. Employees spoke of him in hushed tones, calling him ruthless, cold, untouchable, the kind of man who could dismantle your career with a single glance, yet also elevate you to heights you never dreamed possible if you proved yourself worthy. She had seen glimpses of both sides, the steel and the silence. But what unsettled her most were the fleeting cracks she sometimes noticed in his armor, those rare moments during late nights in the office, when exhaustion softened his features, and his piercing blue eyes lingered on her just a heartbeat longer than they should, moments when the man beneath the title flickered into view before vanishing just as quickly, leaving Isla questioning if she had imagined it. She wasn't here for love. Love was something she had buried months ago when her ex-fiancé left her standing humiliated at the altar, her heart shattered and her faith in people broken beyond repair, forcing her to abandon her small hometown and start over in a city that demanded more than it ever gave. But no matter how tightly she tried to guard herself, working beside Damien made it impossible to ignore the quiet magnetism between them. A pull neither of them wanted, but both felt in every shared silence and every accidental touch. Their routine was grueling yet strangely comforting. 12-hour days spent buried in contracts and negotiations. Her voice the only one brave enough to challenge him when no one else dared. His rare nods of approval a reward that warmed her more than she cared to admit. Still, despite the hours spent in his presence, Isla knew almost nothing about Damien beyond the carefully constructed walls he never let anyone breach. Walls so high and impenetrable they seemed carved from stone, until the night everything changed. A storm unlike any other rolled over Manhattan, rain lashing against the skyscrapers as thunder growled in the distance, the kind of storm that made even the unshakable feel small, and as the office emptied and the building descended into ear. Silence. Only Damien and Isla remained, their focus on last-minute preparations for an overseas deal that could make or break Hawthorne Industries. It was close to midnight when they finally left. The echo of their footsteps reverberating in the marble-lined hallway as they stepped into the elevator together, the storm outside raging with such fury that the city lights flickered ominously. Halfway down, the elevator jolted violently and came to a grinding halt, plunging them into darkness save for the intermittent flash of lightning slicing through the glass panels. At first neither spoke, the silence thick, electric, suffocating, until Isla's trembling voice cut through the darkness, her tone calm, yet edged with quiet fear, as she asked if he thought they'd be stuck long. Damien's answer was curt, controlled, but there was something beneath it, a sharp intake of breath, the faint tremor of someone unused to vulnerability. As the minutes crawled by, the pretense of invincibility began to crumble, and in a voice so low she almost didn't hear it, Damien confessed the one thing he had never told another soul, the truth behind his isolation. He spoke of a woman he once loved, a woman who had not only stolen his heart, but millions from his company, vanishing into the night with his best friend and leaving him with nothing but ashes and rage. Isla listened, her own heartbreak echoing in his words, tears burning her eyes as she realized how deeply his pain mirrored hers. Two wounded souls carrying different scars yet bound by the same quiet longing for something they both feared. Trust. Lightning illuminated his face in fragments, revealing not the untouchable CEO the world revered, but a man haunted, raw, and achingly human. In that confined space, stripped of titles and power, Damien Hawthorne was just a man telling his truth to a woman who, against all odds, made him feel safe enough to share it. Then, without warning, as the storm roared louder and the elevator shuddered under the weight of the wind, their hands brushed. An innocent accident, skin against skin, in the darkness. Yet neither pulled away. Instead, time seemed to fracture around them, their breathing the only sound between rumbles of thunder, the warmth of that simple touch igniting something forbidden, something dangerous, something they had both sworn they'd never allow themselves to feel again. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't even a confession, but it was enough. Enough to awaken a spark neither could ignore. A spark that would burn through every wall they had built, for better or for worse, and set into motion a love story destined to challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The days that followed the storm felt different inside Hawthorne Tower, though no one could quite put their finger on why. Whispers began to swirl through the glass hallways and marble-floored lobbies, carried in hushed voices over coffee breaks and late-night phone calls, whispers about the man they had once called untouchable, the CEO whose ice-cold demeanor had defined the company for years. Something in Damien Hawthorne had shifted, subtle yet undeniable, as though a crack had formed in the armor he'd worn for decades, letting slivers of light escape where there had once been only shadow. Isla Monroe, the quiet assistant who had slipped into his life like an uninvited melody, was at the center of it all. People noticed how he looked at her now, how his gaze lingered a fraction too long when she entered a room, how his voice softened when speaking her name, how he, Damien Hawthorne, the man known for firing executives without blinking, had publicly defended her when a jealous senior manager humiliated her during a presentation, his words slicing through the tension with a sharpness that stunned the entire boardroom. The rumors spread like wildfire. Was Damien Hawthorne finally falling in love? Yet beneath the surface of curious stares and whispered speculation, danger brewed in darker corners, for love in Damien's world was never simple. It was political, it was scrutinized, it was forbidden, and no one embodied that opposition more fiercely than Eleanor Hawthorne, Damien's estranged mother, a woman whose elegant smile concealed steel and venom, who had spent her life sculpting the Hawthorne empire from the ashes of ruin and would sooner watch it burn than allow an ordinary assistant to unravel it. Eleanor despised Isla on sight, not because of who she was, but because of what she represented. Vulnerability, imperfection, a threat to the dynasty she had built brick by ruthless brick. In Eleanor's eyes, Isla was a distraction, a weakness, a reminder of the betrayal that had once cost them everything, and she vowed in silence to eradicate her son's newfound warmth before it destroyed them all. Behind closed doors, she began to weave her web. Secret meetings with loyal board members, whispered warnings to investors, subtle manipulations designed to remind Damien of the danger of letting anyone too close. But what Eleanor didn't understand, what she couldn't yet see, was that Damien's battle was no longer just with her, it was with himself. Every glance at Isla tore him apart, awakening desires he had buried for 20 years, desires that terrified him as much as they tempted him. He would catch himself watching her laugh with the interns, her emerald eyes alight with kindness, and in those moments, the ghosts of his past would scream warnings in his head. Don't trust her. She'll hurt you too. The memories of betrayal were relentless. Flashes of a woman's soft voice lying through a smile, the sting of his best friend's hand on her waist, the hollow ache of being left behind in ruins. Those ghosts haunted him in quiet moments, turning every tender impulse into a battlefield, every instinct to reach for Isla into a war between fear and longing. And yet, no matter how hard he tried to push her away, she was there. In the way her presence softened the harsh edges of his days, in the way she ground at him during chaotic meetings, in the way her silence understood him better than anyone's words ever had. Isla, for her part, felt the shift too, though she kept it buried under professionalism, terrified of what it meant to feel again after swearing she'd never let anyone close. She heard the whispers about them, saw the judgmental stares, felt the weight of being noticed in ways she never wanted. And though part of her longed to believe in the possibility of something real, another part whispered cruelly, "Don't fall. He's your boss. He's untouchable, and love like this will only end in pain. But the forbidden spark they had shared in the elevator refused to die. It lived in every accidental touch, every stolen glance, every breathless moment between them, where the world seemed to narrow until it was only Damien and Isla and the terrifying, undeniable truth that something was growing between them. Something beautiful, something dangerous, something neither of them was ready to name. Damien Hawthorne had spent weeks fighting the forbidden feelings Isla Monroe awakened in him, convincing himself she was different, that perhaps after decades of solitude, he could finally trust someone. But the illusion shattered overnight when the world turned on him with a cruelty so sharp it stole his breath. Headlines exploded across every media outlet, Isla's face plastered beside his in scandalous angles, the captions screaming betrayal, millionaire CEO's assistant caught cheating. And in every photograph, Damien saw her smiling, laughing, leaning into the arms of another man as if every quiet moment they'd shared meant nothing. The images were merciless, designed to wound, and wound they did, dragging him back into the nightmare he'd sworn never to relive, the echoes of an old betrayal roaring in his chest. She's just like the others. You were a fool to believe. His fury, as volcanic yet icy, a storm hidden behind his immaculate composure as he summoned Isla into the boardroom, the place where empires were made and destroyed, now transformed into a stage humiliation. Executives lined the walls, whispers sharp as daggers, the silence electric as Isla walked in, confusion shadowing her emerald eyes, her hands trembling as she clutched a folder she thought was for work, not knowing her world was about to collapse. Damien's voice was calm at first, deceptively calm, the kind of calm that preceded hurricanes, his words slicing the air with precision. I should have known better than to trust anyone again, especially you. The blow landed harder than any scream. Gasps rippled through the room, Isla's lips parting in shock, tears threatening to spill as she struggled to find her voice, to defend herself against an accusation she didn't understand. Damien, please, she whispered, stepping forward, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. It's not what it looks like. He's my brother. He just came back from the military. But her plea was drowned out by the roar of old wounds Damien could not silence, memories of lies whispered in the dark, stolen money, stolen trust, stolen love. The pain was too familiar, too raw, and so he chose the only path he knew, destruction before vulnerability. Get out, he said, louder now, voice shaking not with doubt, but with the effort of holding himself together. You're fired. The words hung heavy in the air, final and merciless. Isla's tears fell silently as she reached into her bag, pulling out the resignation letter she'd written weeks ago in a moment of fear, but never meant to use, her hands trembling as she placed it on the table between them. The room was suffocating with judgment, every pair of eyes on her as she turned away, heels clicking against the marble floor like the slow toll of a funeral bell. Damien didn't move, didn't breathe, watching her leave yet refusing to call her back, even as something inside him shattered beyond repair. The elevator doors closed on her retreating foe, sealing the end of everything neither of them had the courage to name, and with every floor she descended, Isla felt the city's weight pressing down, the neon lights of New York blurring through tears as she stepped into the rain-soaked streets alone, heart splintered, soul hollow. Somewhere high above, Damien stood in his glass office, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond him, the chair where she once sat painfully empty, the silence louder than any storm, haunted by the cruelest truth of all. He hadn't even given her a chance to explain. Months slipped by like silent thieves, each day heavier than the last for Damien Hawthorne, whose once unshakable composure had crumbled into restless nights and hollow mornings. The echo of Isla Monroe's departure haunted him. The sound of her heels against marble, the look in her eyes when he accused her, the truth she tried to speak but he refused to hear. In her absence, the empire he had built felt meaningless, the boardroom victories hollow, the skyline view from his penthouse suffocating rather than triumphant. Every whisper of her name in the wind was a dagger of regret, and for the first time in 20 years Damien allowed himself to feel, truly feel, the weight of loneliness, and the bitter taste of his own mistakes. The breaking point came when he uncovered the truth. Late one night, rummaging through old security logs and financial reports, he found undeniable evidence that the scandalous photos had been fabricated, a calculated plot orchestrated by none other than Eleanor Hawthorne, his own mother, whose manipulations had poisoned every corner of his life. The revelation shattered him. Rage at Eleanor, shame at himself, and a longing for Isla so sharp it stole his breath. He realized with clarity, brutal in its simplicity, he loved her, and he had destroyed her. Redemption became his only purpose, abandoning. The glittering chaos of Manhattan, Damien traced her steps to a quiet coastal town far from the towers of steel and glass they once shared. A place where the air smelled of salt and freedom, where waves whispered secrets to the shore and life moved at the pace of tides rather than stock markets. There, in a small sunlit bookstore tucked between a bakery and a lighthouse, he found her. Isla, standing on a wooden ladder, reaching for a book, hair falling in loose waves, emerald eyes softer yet guarded, carrying the weight of heartbreak and healing in equal measure. The moment she saw him, time stilled. The book slipped from her hands, landing on the floor with a dull thud neither of them heard, silence stretching between them like a fragile bridge threatening to break. Isla's lips parted, but no words came. Damien, for the first time in decades, felt unworthy of speech, of breath, of forgiveness. He had rehearsed apologies in empty hotel rooms, memorized confessions whispered into mirrors, but standing before her stripped them all away until only truth remained. That night, under a vast starlit sky, where the ocean met the horizon in endless dark blue, Damien finally broke the silence that had imprisoned them. "I was wrong," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I believed lies because I was too afraid to believe in us." The words trembled in the salt-kissed air, raw and unpolished, yet more honest than anything he had ever spoken. Isla's eyes filled with tears, glistening like reflections of the stars above them, her chest rising and falling as every memory, every touch, every glance, every wound, rushed back in a single heartbeat. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she let the silence answer, stepping closer until the ocean's roar was drowned out by the sound of their breathing. When Damien's hands finally reached for hers, it was tentative, reverent. The first time in 2 decades he had touched a woman without fear, without suspicion, without the ghosts of betrayal clawing at his spine. Isla's hands trembled in his, not from doubt but from the overwhelming relief of finally being seen, truly seen, for who she was and not for the lies spun around her. Their foreheads touched, the world narrowing to salt air and starlight, their wounds meeting in the quiet space between forgiveness and longing. The kiss that followed was not hurried or hungry, but slow, deliberate, healing, a merging of broken pieces into something whole, a promise spoken without words that love, once shattered, could be rebuilt brick by tender brick. In that moment, beneath the endless expanse of night and ocean, Damien Hawthorne and Isla Monroe rewrote the ending. Neither of them had dared to dream. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And for the first time, that was enough. The kiss beneath the starlit sky had been tender, hesitant, a quiet promise that after all the storms they had endured, love was still possible. But as Damien Hawthorne held Isla Monroe close by the crashing waves, he knew deep in his bones that this fragile happiness would not go unchallenged. For every quiet moment of peace they found together, there were 1,000 eyes watching, waiting, ready to tear them apart. And by the time dawn broke over the coastal town, that storm had already begun to gather. The first blow came in the form of headlines. Grainy paparazzi photos of Damien and Isla walking hand in hand along the pier splashed across every major news outlet. Sensational captions screaming, "Millionaire CEO abandons empire for former assistant," and "Scandalous romance threatens Hawthorne legacy." Within hours, stock prices wavered, investors panicked, and whispers of recklessness filled the upper echelons of Manhattan's corporate world. But while the media feasted on the scandal, far more dangerous fury brewed behind closed doors in the marble halls of the Hawthorne estate, where Eleanor Hawthorne sat alone in her sunlit study, eyes sharp as glass, the morning paper trembled. Eing in her manicured hands, Eleanor had devoted her entire life to preserving the family empire. She had sacrificed love, endured betrayals, raised her son to be unbreakable, and now, watching, Damien's name dragged through tabloids because of a woman she deemed ordinary, unworthy. Her anger hardened into something ruthless. She swore then and there that Isla Monroe would never destroy what she had built. Her war began in silence but struck with surgical precision. Legal threats drafted overnight, defamation campaigns unleashed, anonymous tips fed to tabloids painting Isla as a manipulative opportunist who had ensnared the untouchable CEO. Private investigators were hired to dig through Isla's past, fabricating stories where none existed, twisting her quiet life into ammunition. Reporters camped outside the small bookstore where Isla worked, flashing cameras blinding her as she stepped outside, their taunts cruel. "How much are you taking him for? Are you marrying for love or money?" Envelopes stuffed with hush money arrived at her door, offers of millions if she disappeared quietly and let Damien return to his rightful life. But Isla, though terrified, refused to bend. She had rebuilt herself from ashes once before and would not let fear define her again. Damien, watching from afar as the woman he loved was dragged through mud he had once been blind to, felt the last remnants of loyalty to his family disintegrate. He had given everything to the Hawthorne name, his youth, his dreams, even his capacity for love. And now, standing in the wreckage of what they had tried to do to Isla, he finally understood that the legacy he had bled for was nothing but a gilded cage. With newfound resolve burning in his chest, Damien returned to Manhattan not to salvage his reputation, but to sever the chains that bound him. He walked into the Hawthorne estate like a storm incarnate, flanked by lawyers and followed by the weight of 2 decades of silence. The confrontation was inevitable, explosive. Eleanor standing tall at the head of the grand staircase, pearls glint, ting against her throat, her voice icy calm as she demanded, "End this farce, Damien, before you destroy us all." But Damien no longer flinched beneath her gaze. "You destroyed me long before Isla," he said, voice low but steady, each word cutting through the silence like a blade. What followed was years of resentment spilling into the open, Eleanor accusing him of weakness, Damien condemning her for choosing power over love, for turning him into a man who trusted no one. Her composure cracked, fury blazing in her eyes as she hurled every threat she could muster: disinheritance, lawsuits, the collapse of the empire. And then, in the quiet after the storm of shouting, Damien delivered the words that would end everything. "If loving Isla costs me everything, then let it burn. Because for the first time in my life, I'm alive." The declaration echoed through the marble halls, silencing even the ticking of the antique clock. Eleanor, pale with shock and rage, turned her back on him, muttering that he was no son of hers, and in that moment Damien felt no loss, only freedom. Leaving the estate, he walked into a media firestorm waiting outside the gates, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. But Damien held Isla's hand tightly as they pushed through, their love no longer a secret but a defiance. The press called him reckless, investors branded him unstable, but for the first time, Damien didn't care. He no longer measured his worth in boardroom victories or family approval. Only in the quiet certainty of Isla's hand in his, the steady rhythm of 2 hearts choosing each other despite the world's chaos. And as they stood side by side, battered yet unbroken, Damien realized that this, not wealth, not legacy, was the life he had been searching for all along. Love, fragile and imperfect, but real enough to fight for, even if it meant burning everything else to the source, ground. The storm had finally passed, though the scars it left behind would forever mark Damien Hawthorne's soul. Months had slipped by since the day he chose Isla Monroe. Over the Hawthorne empire, months where chaos gave way to quiet healing, where scandal faded into memory and love quietly bloomed in its place, fragile yet unyielding. Damien, once the untouchable CEO whose life was defined by glass towers and silence, found himself transformed in ways he never thought possible. The ice in his veins melted, replaced by warmth each time Isla's laughter filled the air, each time her emerald eyes caught his across a crowded room. Together they had rebuilt not just a relationship, but themselves. Two broken souls stitching each other back together, finding beauty in imperfection. Manhattan's skyline no longer felt like a cage, but neither did it hold the same allure. Their hearts belonged to quieter places now. Bookstores smelling of paper and ink, cliffsides where waves sang lullabies, kitchens where late-night coffee tasted sweeter than champagne. Yet even in peace, Damien carried a truth he had yet to speak aloud, a truth not of empire or apology, but of devotion so deep it terrified him. And so, one crisp autumn morning, he prepared the moment that would finally set him free. The boardroom where once he had humiliated Isla now stood empty, cleared of shareholders and egos, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows onto polished marble floors. It was here, in this very place that symbolized his greatest failures, that Damien would rewrite their story, not with extravagance but with honesty. Isla arrived unsuspecting, summoned under the pretense of reviewing a charity project, her hair loose around her shoulders, her smile soft yet questioning. Damien's heart pounded as he watched her enter, memories of their first meeting flooding back. The cautious girl with trembling hands and quiet strength who had unknowingly unraveled 2 decades of walls. Now she stood before him, no longer trembling but radiant, shaped by every trial they had endured together. Damien stepped forward, words trembling on his tongue but clear in his heart, and for the first time in his life, he spoke without fear. For 20 years, he began, voice raw yet steady. I never touched anyone, not because I couldn't, but because I was waiting for you. Silence followed, heavy with meaning. Isla's breath caught, tears glistening as his confession shattered the last remnants of distance between them. Damien knelt. No diamonds, no photographers, no crowd. Just a simple band and a love forged in fire. Marry me, he whispered, not as a plea but a promise. Isla's answer came not in words at first but in the way she fell to her knees beside him, her forehead resting against his, tears of joy mingling with quiet laughter. Yes, she breathed, so soft it might have been mistaken for the wind, yet it echoed louder in Damien's soul than any applause ever could. Their wedding was unlike any the Hawthorne name had ever known. No gilded ballrooms, no flashing cameras, no guest lists curated for status. Instead, a small gathering on a rugged cliff where sea met sky, waves crashing below like a hymn, the wind carrying vows to the heavens. Isla wore a simple ivory dress, hair kissed by ocean breeze, and Damien, in a linen suit, looked at her as though seeing sunlight for the first time. When they exchanged vows, it wasn't wealth or grandeur they promised, but constancy, to choose each other through storms and quiet mornings alike. Friends who had stood by them through every trial bore witness, tears in their eyes as the man once called untouchable finally laid down his armor. When Damien kissed Isla as his wife, it was not victory but surrender, surrendering to love, to vulnerability, to the life he had spent decades denying himself. That night, beneath soft candlelight and the gentle hum of waves, they shared a dance with no music but their own laughter, every step a silent celebration of survival and hope. The city that once whispered rumors now watched quietly as the couple disappeared, from headlines choosing privacy over spectacle, depth over display. Damien sold his stake in the family empire soon after, walking away from the dynasty that had cost him so much, investing instead in causes Isla cared about. Literacy programs, homes for veterans, shelters for women rebuilding their lives. Together they turned pain into purpose, their love spilling outward into acts of quiet revolution. In the intimacy of their home, a seaside cottage far from the chaos of skyscrapers, Damien learned the simplest joys. Mornings spent reading in silence, evenings cooking side by side, the quiet knowledge that love didn't have to be loud to be eternal. And in those quiet moments, Isla saw not the CEO the world once revered, but the man who had waited 20 years to touch someone without fear. On a night much like the one they first reunited, stars scattered across an ink-black sky, oceans singing below. Isla curled against Damien's chest, whispering a single word that held the weight of every promise they had ever made, every scar they had ever healed. Forever. And for the first time in 2 decades, Damien Hawthorne believed it. Not as a hope, not as a wish, but as truth. The empire was gone, the title forgotten, the legacy rewritten not in steel and glass, but in love and quiet devotion. And as they fell asleep to the rhythm of the waves, the man once called untouchable finally understood that true strength was never about walls or solitude. It was about letting someone in and daring to keep them close, no matter the cost. Their story was no fairy tale, no perfect dream, but it was theirs. Raw, real, and against every odds stacked against them, endless.